Ceti vs. the Dow Greys. Excerpt from Brandon's Secrets of the Mojave, Section 2. In the spring, 1991 issue of UFO Journal of Facts, Book 17206. Tucson, Arizona 85710, researcher Forrest Crawford gives a very remarkable description of a crash recovery of a disk which was reported by a former deep-level government employee who Crawford refers to only as Oscar. For reasons which should be obvious, Oscar's single quote last name was not given. His story, as quoted by Crawford, is as follows. The eggs had their typical lack of firmness and the sausage tasted more like greasy rope than pork links. The order to mobilize saved me from this breakfast experiment. We proceeded down 6 flights of stairs below the Contra Pac submarine base in San Diego to shoot the tubes. After placing a few pieces of jewelry in a container, I climbed into the cylinder to travel the tunnels to an unknown assignment. I wondered what was so important to upgrade our pay from E3 to E6 before we left, and besides that, we could not even finish breakfast. As I am told of our departure, a familiar uneasy feeling comes over me. When you push down on the accelerator in your car, one can feel the tug of inertia sinking you into the seat. When you travel the tubes there is no feeling of motion, but you know when the door opens you will be in another place hundreds, even thousands of miles away. For some comfort I checked to see if the watch hidden in my pocket was still there. I quickly looked to see if it is still running. It seems to be working normally, so why no jewelry? Because of electrical charge built up perhaps? The soft clang of the door opening made me tense again. I did not even feel a stop. Peeking at the watch I noted only 30 minutes had passed. We must be in California, Nevada or Arizona, I thought. As I stepped from the windowless capsule I heard a military policeman murmur, "Turner's Rangers." Our reputation had preceded us. As I readorned my jewelry the first surprise of this assignment was about to come. A high-ranking naval O.S. officer informs us that we will not be allowed above ground while in North Dakota. North Dakota. Several of us were led to a large hangar-like room that had been quickly set up to function as a laboratory. Resting on heavy jackstands in the middle of the room was a large disc-shaped craft. The chief scientist present was introduced as Professor Bear. As his briefing and some discussion proceeded, I rapidly developed rapport with this talented, open-minded and gentle man. The craft had crashed near Phoenix, Arizona and was moved to this North Dakota base. 2 dead alien bodies with fatal radiation exposure were found outside the craft. I reflected on my O.S. training for crash retrieval and remembered thinking, we will never get a chance to be involved in anything that exciting. Well, not only was I involved, I was the security team leader. This meant that when the craft was opened I would be the first one inside. After all, one does not send in a high-ranking officer or a chief scientist to possibly encounter an alien booby trap or extraterrestrial virus. Come to think of it, the prospects did not excite me either. As Professor Bear prepared his ultrasonic sound generators for opening the craft, my apprehension turned to intensity. After all, this was what my training was for. As the Bear tuned his equipment, the smooth solid metal surface of the craft began to ripple like when you throw a stone in the water. When the ripples seemed to gain harmonic stability, the now liquid metal parted in a circular iris-like fashion. As I stepped inside I noticed a fresh pine scent and a strange smoothness to everything. The interior was rounded off and continued with no seams or rivets. It was as if the walls, floor and ceiling were formed out of one piece of metal. Even a table in the center of the craft looked as though it had been pushed up out of the floor. What appeared to be control panels had no knobs, switches or dials. There were strange symbols highlighting these futuristic yet simple consoles. The outside of the craft had no apparent damage, yet the interior showed some distortion, possibly from the crash. Next to one of the panels I could see something that would challenge my training and change my perceptions of reality forever. The craft was just another piece of hardware, but seated next to the panel was a human. Its gender was obviously male. Aside from his unusual dress he could have walked past you at a grocery store and not command much attention. Upon noticing some injuries about his head I instinctively and quickly moved toward him to help. His skin was a bronze color, reminiscent of Mediterranean or South American cultures. His hair was similarly brown and very short in a Roman or Crew-style cut. The only real difference in appearance from Earth humans were that his ears were slightly pointed. He reminded me of pictures of Quetzalcoatl, the deity of the ancient Toltecs. Note, this mythic being, which was also known as the feathered serpent, may have been either human or serpentine, depending on the different depictions given by the ancient Mayas, Toltecs, etc., Branton. Single quote He was conscious and in great pain. One leg was partially pinned by the shifting interior. I was examining cuts on his cheek and lip when I first touched him. An overwhelming feeling of compassion came over me as I heard his voice in my head. I could understand him clearly even though his mouth did not move. The communication was strictly telepathic. Note, in this case he means empathic. There is little evidence that actual mind-to-mind thought reading is a reality, at least without the aid of sophisticated technology. Even if it were possible, the words formed in the mind of the human encountered by Oscar would most likely be in a language completely unfamiliar to him. Most people who experience this phenomena claim that thought words are not involved, but that so-called telepathy instead involves the empathic feelings or images behind these words. Emotions are the most common universal language between the various different human races, wherever they may be. Many experts claim that words make up only about 20% of the actual communication which passes between people. Sometimes body language, facial expressions, feelings, eye contact, and attitudes tell more about what a person is thinking than mere words can. This is because humans have a dual physical and spiritual nature. Just as an astronomer can determine the chemical makeup of a star by looking at its spectrograph, human beings are like lights in themselves who can to a large extent be interpreted by others who are sensitive to the feelings, expressions in words, attitudes which they are projecting. For instance, emotions, sight, and even thoughts result from a combination of the physical and spiritual natures of human beings. So with this interjection, we now continue with Oscar's single quote account. I perceived his fear of being harmed and told him that I would not let anyone hurt him. Suddenly, a voice from the doorway refocused my attention on the duties at hand. I called back that we had a live one. The craft filled with gloved and masked medical personnel to help free the occupant. He was quickly carried outside and placed on a gurney. I remarked that he felt heavy for his size, and a few others that had assisted agreed. As the alien was whisked off for medical attention, Professor Bear examined the inside of the craft. He found what he thought was a star map depicting the constellation Eridanus and wondered if that might be where the alien was from. After a brief discussion concerning the nature of the communications, Bear asked me to accompany him to the medical lab. As we talked along the way, I referred to the alien being as Hank. The professor asked if that was the name the alien had given me. I explained that it was not and that I had chosen that nickname based on its Native American reference to a troubled spirit. The professor smiled and said, "Hank it is," and the name seemed to immediately stick. In the antiseptic, impersonal medical room, Hank's discomfort was compounded by his complete undressing. While still in great pain, he was examined from head to toe. No stone was left unturned, so to speak. They treated him as if he were a baby of some rare animal species being first born into captivity. It became evident that Hank could not communicate with everyone involved, so I was asked to be translator. I had no trouble understanding that the normal anesthetics we were administering had little or no effect. Suddenly, with Hank's discomfort still a concern, everyone's attention became divided between the being and a new person arriving on the scene. This new person was obviously important, yet seemed to make everyone uneasy. Even Hank recoiled in fear when he came close. He barked a few stern orders and several people, myself included, marched into a nearby conference room. The man introduced himself as Frank Drake and told us he was the head of the operation. The reports would henceforth be titled Project Ozma with an S. As the sound of his continued briefing faded into a daydream, I thought about how my regimented life had just jumped track and was now speeding off in a totally new direction. Forrest Crawford, commenting on the incident, states, "This extraordinary story, according to the witness, is not fiction. Oscar is a simple country person from rural Missouri where he lives with his wife, 3 children, and a menagerie of stray animals. His life is seemingly uncomplicated and unhurried. However, his eyes reflect a clarity indicative of inner knowledge and understanding. We first came to meet this man as the result of a lead from nuclear physicist and renowned ufologist, Stanton Friedman. At the Show Me UFO Conference 1989 single quote in St. Louis, Friedman asked Bruce Wideman, state director of Missouri Muffin, if he would attempt to locate a witness that called responding to the Unsolved Mysteries show on the Roswell crash. The person in question had possibly been involved in a crash retrieval while in the military. The tip had come from a former neighbor of Oscar's. Wideman of course agreed to follow up since Friedman felt that the witness did not have a phone. So with little else than a name, town, and rumor to go on, the search began. Wideman and Alex Horvat, public information officer for Missouri Muffin, arrived in the small town near St. Louis after dark. After questioning a girl at a local convenience mart, no further leads were found. Horvitz suggested checking the local bar. This produced a description of a front yard that might be that of the elusive witness. After driving up and down the lane several times, one yard seemed more appropriate than the others, so they hesitantly stopped. Stepping from the car into the country night proved harrowing enough, as several large dogs snarled and barked from the surrounding darkness. Whitman was further unnerved when a large black dog began licking his hand as he knocked on the door. Not knowing whether he was being greeted or tasted by the animal, Whitman was relieved to see someone answer. After a brief explanation of what our investigations were, an invitation to sit and talk came as a positive sign. The stranger said he did not know where Bill, the name given Friedman, was, but that he was his brother. After Whitman and Horvitz explained their purpose and some of their feelings and ideas, he finally conceded that he was in fact the man they were looking for. He explained that his real name was Oscar and that the name Bill had been given so he would know where any inquiries were coming from. As Oscar told the story that began this article, it became obvious that, because of his military background, the name given was for his protection. The account unfolded further to reveal horrible injustices to Hank and to Oscar himself. At the direction of Drake, the team conducted medical experiments such as spinal taps, marrow sampling, taking organ specimens, and other exploratory surgery on Hank without anesthesia. Oscar had spent many hours over 3 months communicating with and growing close to the alien. One day he stepped between Drake and Hank with his .45 cal pistol drawn and demanded an end to the torture. Drake withdrew, but the next morning Oscar had new orders to depart immediately for St. Albans Hospital in Radford, Virginia, where he was incarcerated for debriefing. He remained isolated for several months until the efforts of Lieutenant Charles Turner, Oscar's commanding officer, got him to move to a psychiatric ward. His family, who had now been out of touch with him for almost 3 months, was told that Oscar had suffered a head injury during a submarine accident. After spending time under psychiatric care, which would damage his military record, he was oddly enough given an honorable discharge. After having returned to civilian life, he and his father embarked on a hiking trip to North Dakota. They purposely entered the restricted area surrounding the base where Oscar had been stationed. Perimeter Patrol picked them up for removal from the area. While in their company, Oscar asked how Hank was doing. One of the guards confided that the alien had died several months earlier. The next trip out to the country included myself and David Rapp, a physicist with 13 years experience in the aerospace industry and also director of investigations for Missouri Muffin. Because of our backgrounds in science, the discussion focused on technical questions about Oscar's experiences. As for the alleged home of Hank's single quote people, Crawford states, the pattern from the panel inside the ship was confirmed by Rapp to match stars of the constellation Eridanus as seen from Earth. It was later confirmed by Hank that the stars of origin of his people were Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. In later sessions, Oscar discussed some reasons for the presence of the aliens. He said they do not like the situation with some of the small gray aliens, emphasis ours, Branton. He corrected us when we used the term gray and said that they are actually white. The Tau sessions feel that the abductions being carried out by some of the Greys are a great injustice to humanity. They are a parasitic race that has and is preying on human civilizations throughout the universe, Oscar relayed. He added that our government's involvement with the Greys is very dangerous and out of control. Oscar is adamant that the bug people, that is Oscar's term for these creatures, Branton, are using human fluids for sustenance. They feed by immersing their arms in vats and rubbing the fluids on their bodies. He claims that they are also kidnapping children. To our knowledge, Oscar had in no way at the time been in contact with John Lear nor any other researcher who has alleged this exact same thing. Oscar's claim that these creatures are more whitish or albino in color would seem consistent with accounts concerning some branches of the serpent race. As Oscar alleges, not all Greys have been described as having the same coloring. Some have been described as plain gray, others blue-gray, gray-green, or grayish-white. One source suggests that the coloring has a direct connection with the amount of protein formula which they have access to. Also, Oscar's reference to the bug people may be based on the fact that the reptilian branch known as the Greys and others branches of the serpent race are often said to resemble praying mantis-like creatures in that their eyes are sometimes bug-like and protruding, and their long arms, which often reach down below their knees, often appear mantis-like when in their folded or reposed position, elbows pointed downwards and clawed hands positioned above. In fact, some of the early saurians such as the Tyrannosaurus rex kept their arms in such a position, elbows pointed down, although many of the modern sauroids possess arms which are now much longer. But a more likely explanation is one that has been given by researcher Ray Keller. Keller's sources indicate that reptilian greys from reticuli have created a sub-race by assimilating genetic materials from another intelligent and malevolent alien species of insectoids. Therefore some of the greys being observed by abductees may actually be reptilian insectoid genetic hybrids. John Lear stated in his infamous UFO document, which he posted on the Paranet computer bulletin board, that some of the beings recovered from the earlier crashed disks were mantis-like and reptilian-skinned. The possibility of little children being abducted and used for their secretions and body organs is almost too horrible to contemplate. There may be other indications that such is the case, whether one chooses to believe it or not. For instance, 1. Bill English, son of an Arizona state legislator and a former Green Beret commander, allegedly viewed the top-secret Grudge/Blue Book report No. 13 years after he investigated a downed aircraft which radioed an encounter with a UFO, and whose occupants were later found mutilated. He stated that this secret document contained eyewitness descriptions of children who had been abducted by Grey-type entities, one of them being abducted on a farm right in front of the parents, and never seen again. 2. The August 1940 issue of National Geographic detailed the disappearance of 30 children and their teachers in some catacombs below the island of Malta. Sources contemporary to the event stated that they had entered a burial chamber in the third or lowest level of the hypogeum of Hal Solflini, an orifice which was rumored to lead to deeper catacombs. The ancient catacombs were discovered below the small village of Casal Paula in 1902 when workmen literally fell into it while digging. They discovered over 30,000 bones and evidence of ancient human sacrifice conducted by an old Neolithic race. Witnesses to the disappearance said that a sudden cave-in had blocked the opening after the last child had gone through, but the rope they used to tie themselves to the lower room was found to be clean-cut, and many reported hearing the crying and wailing of children from below ground weeks after the disappearance. According to researcher Riley Crabb of the Borderland Sciences Research Foundation, a British embassy employee by the name of Miss Lewis Jessup entered the lower catacombs a few days before the disappearance, catacombs which she described as being immense. She allegedly encountered a sudden and mysterious wind which blew out her candle, following which she felt something wet and slippery brush past her. Needless to say, she left the scene in a hurry. Nevertheless, this account indicates how children sometimes tend to disappear in the presence of aerial or subsurface phenomena. 3. John Lear also claims, based upon accounts given to him by several contacts of his in the intelligence community, that there is evidence that a percentage of America's missing children have been taken by these creatures, the Greys, suggesting that the aliens largely prey on the weak and defenseless among the human race. It is uncertain, however, what percentage of missing children might be involved here. Lear, in his press release of June 3, 1988, stated in reference to human abductees and victims of human mutilation, the various parts of the body are taken to various underground laboratories, one of which is known to be near the small New Mexico town of Dulce. This jointly occupied CIA alien facility has been described as enormous, with huge tiled walls that go on forever. Witnesses have reported huge vats filled with amber liquid with parts of human bodies being stirred inside. He secretions obtained are then mixed with hydrogen peroxide and applied on the skin of the Greys by spreading or dipping parts of their bodies in the solution. The body absorbs the solution, then excretes the waste back through the skin. Like reptiles excrete waste through the shedding of their skins. Brenton, this would confirm Oscar's single quote claims to this effect. 4. Researcher William Cooper, who was formerly a chief petty officer and intelligence worker in the Pacific Naval Fleet, pointed out at the 1989 Muffin Conference in Las Vegas that over 3,000 children disappear without a trace yearly in one part of Manhattan alone. We might relate this to other obscure though evident indications that Manhattan literally sits atop vast underground caverns which have been confirmed by different sources, including Con Edison when they broke into a vast cavity at a depth of 200 feet while drilling in a Manhattan park. Cooper also claimed to have seen top-secret reports stating that sections of human bodies were found stored on disks retrieved from crash recovery sites, and that the government was extremely disturbed by this aspect of the alien activity. 5. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts of women who had been a few months along in a pregnancy, most often an unexplained pregnancy, only to find after a UFO abduction experience that their baby suddenly disappeared. These accounts are reality. It is very unlikely that hundreds or thousands of women would collectively use the same bizarre, identical excuse if they themselves aborted a child and did not wish others to think that they did so, especially when many of these women were the only ones who knew of the pregnancy. 6. Although many of the children who are allegedly abducted and never seen again are of the homeless or unwanted type, street children of prostitutes, and so on, children who will not be missed as much as others, it also appears that thousands of children who belong to middle-class families are also being abducted, implanted and returned. Since the disappearance of these would cause far more waves than a child without a guardian, they are used instead for purposes of manipulation. It appears that these infernal creatures are extremely cautious and cunning, and have hidden their tracks and even their very existence well, at least up until the 1970s to 1980s when abductions started to make the news in a profound way. Forrest Crawford continues. Oscar, based on what Hank communicated to him, claims that they are also kidnapping children. The Tau sessions have been preyed upon by these aliens before, and they are working with other races and communities that were also victims. One such race, emphasis ours, Branton, that Oscar claims was run off their home planet by the Bug people, was what we now call the Nordics or Pleiadians. He claims, because of his ongoing contacts, he was made aware of the Billy Meyer case in Switzerland and swears that is a real contact. I find all these comments interesting, especially when you consider one investigative detail of this case. I have seen Oscar's house, his mother's house, his workshop and truck, and at no time were any books, magazines, transcripts or movies about any subject, let alone recent UFO material, found. Could he be an avid reader of the latest and most controversial UFO documents and just be hiding them when we come over? This is highly unlikely since, without a phone, our visits were always unannounced. Oscar wants people to know that if they are contacted by the Tau sessions, humans such as he described, to not be afraid because they are here to help. This attitude is reflected in correlations with a totally independent case involving a woman near Springfield, Illinois. Jill Walport relates an ongoing and very serious involvement with gray aliens. After Bud Hopkins, whose research inspired the May 1992 CBS network miniseries, Intruders, Branton spoke to her at length. The case was recommended to John Carpenter, State Section Director of Missouri Muffin, and then to myself. The intensity and detail of the case is reminiscent of Debbie Tomey's Kathy Davis experiences. In my first interview with Jill, she asked if anyone had ever been abducted/contacted by more than one race or group of aliens. I told her that it was reported with some frequency and asked her which other one she had seen with the Greys. She said it was a totally separate contact and that they did not like the Greys. When asked about their appearance, she reported that they were human, approximately about 5.5 feet in height, 180-200 pounds but not fat, tanned-looking skin with short haircuts that laid flat against their heads. I asked her to describe their eyes, ears, nose and mouth. She said all features were essentially normal except the nose was broad and flat and their eyes were brown. Oscar reported the weight of Hank to be 190 pounds and 5 feet 7 inches tall. He also noted the broad, flat nose. Even this aspect is not unusually alien to Earth, being that many of the dark races possess broad facial features. Branton. Jill informed me that the aliens told her they didn't like what some of the aliens were doing to her without her consent. They had come to help her learn how to overcome the deceptions of the Greys and to protect herself. They explained that she needed to psychically build a shield around herself, like a brick wall, when they came for her. This would help keep her from being deceived by their mind tricks. She tried it the next time the Greys came for her and it seemed to work. According to many accounts, mere willpower does not always guarantee that one will escape the overlapping deceptions and psychic manipulations of the serpent race or the Greys. Divine intervention is, according to some, the only fail-safe way to ensure oneself from being entangled by their deceptions, which are often deep, complex, and extremely subtle. There are actually accounts where people on the verge of being abducted began to pray, at which point the potential abductors left the scene. Also Clifford Stone, a high-level military officer based at Roswell, New Mexico, who has received much criticism from his higher-ups for his insistence on telling the public what he knows about the Greys, says that several skirmishes between the United States troops and alien Greys broke out in the jungles of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, some of them ending in tragedy on our side. However, one case involved a soldier who was a reborn Christian, who had a girlfriend in a particular village. During one visit he came upon a landed craft and some Greys that were trying to entice some of the townsfolk to take a ride, possibly a permanent one, aboard their ship. The soldier came between the villagers and the Greys, and although his semi-automatic weapon had little effect against their bulletproof uniforms, the Bible he carried and the cross he wore did have a definite adverse and weakening effect against the intruders, which immediately left the scene. Stone also confirmed that there have been many dogfights between the Nordics and the Greys that the government is aware of. Source: article by Robert W. Boyajian in UFO Universe, Spring 1988. In reference to Jill, Forrest Crawford continues. At this point the correlation counter in my mind was working overtime, so I decided to go for gold and ask her if they told her where they were from. Believe it or not, she replied, "Tau Ceti, does that make any sense?" Later I mentioned to Oscar that I was investigating a case that involved intense interaction with Greys and Tau sessions showing up to help. He asked where the case was from and I told him near Springfield, Illinois. He rattled off a very accurate description of Jill and said he was aware that she had been contacted. Horvitz showed several pictures of people from the archives of ufology, one of which was Drake. Oscar immediately picked Drake's photo from the stack and one could see the anger come over his face at the sight of this man. Follow-up research by Horvitz produced an interesting set of circumstances. The crash in question happened in 1961. Some of you will remember that Drake headed the OSMA program, the predecessor to SETI. In 1961 Drake announced that OSMA, in its search for intelligent extraterrestrial radio signals, would first look to the stars Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. During one interview with Oscar, Crawford became concerned about the logistics of a tunnel system stretching from California to North Dakota to Washington, D.C., etc., attempting to correlate this with their background in science. According to what Oscar revealed to Crawford and his research companion, it became evident that this was not feasible. With careful questioning it was discovered, according to Oscar, that the tunnels went only a short distance and did not actually connect to the North Dakota base. The capsule shuttle was accelerated and then a time-space window was opened. The exit door of the time-space window simultaneously opened at the prescribed destination, where the capsule would appear in a tunnel and decelerate. One must wonder why an entire half-hour was necessary for such an instantaneous transit, unless a tremendous speed was necessary to attain the subspace jump. There are accounts as given by researcher William Hamilton and others that some of the subterranean societies beneath America, the Telosians for instance, possess a tube shuttle system. From his description it appears however that the Telosians utilized actual vacuum tube shuttle tunnels which stretch for hundreds if not thousands of miles. Perhaps the early shuttle systems constructed by ancient technically advanced societies were of this variety, and were replaced or upgraded with time-space windows later? Is it possible that the government's eventual and alleged discovery of ancient tunnels, leading to this particular subsurface colony, has led to a joint Telosian-American use of the ancient sub-shuttle systems? Or are the tunnels referred to by Oscar entirely the United States government constructions? Also, a similar network of vacuum tube shuttle tunnels is also said to converge below Dulce, New Mexico, according to many sources. These are allegedly used mostly by the Greys, and possibly by certain mind-controlled Samib-type groups who may be working for them. The technology for the teleport tunnels described by Oscar Branton was supposedly a combination of our own knowledge, rooted in the Philadelphia experiment, and acquired alien technology. Oscar also talked about the geological location of time-space-dimension doors. These places allow an easy entry of extraterrestrial craft into our atmosphere. Two such large natural doorways were reported to be just northeast of Seattle, Washington and south of the Apostle Islands in Lake Superior. An interesting possible correlation with the predicted natural time-space windows can be found in studying patterns on special energy maps. One such map is the Booger Gravity Anomaly Map. Oddly enough, a fairly local low-gravity area can be found at the locations mentioned by Oscar, not only near Seattle and the Apostle Islands, but also in Missouri, where Oscar claimed to have had most of his subsequent contacts meetings with the Tau sessions. Branton. My research is finding some interesting patterns emerging by comparing the location of gravity anomalies, Indian reservations, military bases and cavern entrances. These specialty maps can be purchased at great prices from Geoscience Resources. 2990 Anthony Road, Burlington, North Carolina 27215. One last note on the above account. William Cooper describes another incident involving a reptilian, Grey, which was allegedly recovered from a crash retrieval in the southwest. Enormous efforts were taken to try to save the life of this ugly little beast, which had a tendency to lie its way through subsequent interviews with military intelligence. Yet when it came to an actual human alien like Hank, certain people could apparently have cared less for his/their personal welfare. Cooper also alleged that the secret government for a large part refused to ally themselves with the Nordics or human aliens who warned them about the malevolence of the Greys, and chose instead to go ahead and form an alliance with the reptilian Greys, since an Illuminati Grey alliance would seemingly help the cause of the power elite serpent cults, who were making a killing off of exploiting the masses, a practice which the Greys themselves encouraged and assisted in. One claim is that the serpent cultists working in the government already maintained an ages-old pact with these draconian powers, and one can reason that because of this they may have refused the advances of the Nordics. Apparently these did not desire to accept the conditions required by the Nordics, which included the discontinuation of nuclear weapons proliferation and the cessation of multi-billion-dollar war efforts which, according to many sources, have also filled the pockets of the secret government which covertly operates through secret societies in nearly every country.